Hello and welcome to the CX Files for 28th July 2022. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Greetings, Mark, from Montreal, Quebec. I'm Peter Ryan. Great to talk to you today.
And it's great to catch up with you again, just at the end of July now. Well, we've got a great conversation today with Andrew Hall, who's the Chief Commercial Officer at Quantanite. Now, Quantanite it's been a little bit under the radar recently, but they seem to be offering some very specific new services. And one of their key areas of focus is content moderation. And I know we've talked about this in the past on the podcast, but Andrew's got some really interesting views on this. Certainly, there's a move towards focusing on this in the kind of post-COVID environment, because we've seen so much of growth in gaming and content streaming, and then people just sharing so much content online. But I think that normally we've seen content moderation focus on social media in the past. You know, what's been uploaded to Facebook, what's been uploaded to YouTube, this kind of thing. But as Andrew describes in the interview, you know, this has moved on. You know, now retailers, e-commerce companies, travel companies, everybody's relying on consumer reviews and user-generated content. People are uploading photos of resorts they've visited or products they've purchased. You know, almost every different kind of industry relies on some sort of feedback from customers now. So there's a big transformation taking place.
There's a huge transformation taking place, and I think that Andrew raises a lot of good points. It's no longer just the domain of Twitter, Facebook, Instagram for content moderation. This is literally every e-commerce platform that's out there. This is literally all the third-party independent rating platforms that are out there that you can access on the web. And being able to ensure that your brand is not compromised, number one, and number two, that the information that's being put out there or the images that are being put out there in many cases are going to be conform and really in the domain of acceptability is so important. But as you say, Mark, I mean, this is not necessarily something that you can find a formula for or a magic bullet. This is ever evolving, and organizations that are undergoing content moderation initiatives need to evolve with the changes and be able to keep up with the pace and even anticipate where things are going, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult to recruit, very difficult to make sure that brand integrity is maintained.
And it's very interesting as well, because there's a big technology angle to this. There's a lot of AI that can filter out stuff without a human ever needing to see it. But there's also just this focus on the people themselves. You know, how do you look after these people? Because if the AI is filtering out most of the stuff, well, that generally means that the nastiest content is going in front of a human operator. So you need a very different way of managing these people compared to the normal kind of contact center workers. And typically, you know, you'll have a psychologist right there in the office. You'll have helplines for people that are feeling disturbed by what they've seen. And you need to, it's like as if you need to have a primary focus on the wellness and the mental health of these people because of the stuff they're getting exposed to.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that Paula Kennedy Garcia was a guest on the pod a few months back, and she was raising a lot of these points about content moderation, all of which I think were very apropos, but we're seeing snowball over the course of the past few months as well. And certainly I think it'll continue into the end of this year. And just to note, Mark, in the most recent iteration of the Front Office CX Omnibus Survey, one of the things that was identified as a major challenge for enterprise contact centers was in fact content moderation, being able to manage some of the challenges that go along with this function. Equally speaking, there was also a great deal of interest amongst the buying community from the enterprise side to work with outsourcers that are able to provide strong content moderation solutions.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it's interesting that we've seen this because it's actually quite different to a contact center that's focused on sales or customer service. Obviously, you need a lot of people. They need to be connected together as teams. So there's a sort of parallel with the traditional contact center. And that's why all the BPOs have kind of piled into this marketplace. But it is really a different service. So I think that, you know, if you are, let's say, an e-commerce company and you're worried about protecting your customers and what they're going to see online, because you're facilitating product reviews and stuff like that. If you're going out there and doing an RFP and talking to 5 or 6 different BPOs to see who can do your content moderation, I think that the key focus will now be, how are you looking after those people, and how are you making sure that we don't just have 200% attrition, and we don't care about the fact that people are joining and then leaving after a couple of months.
Yeah, exactly. These are some of the challenges, and these are, I think, some of the elements where the BPO community is going to need to try and show that there's a level of depth in terms of their understanding about the need for content moderation, what this entails, and equally speaking, what their structural plan is to make sure that they're able to find the best people, to be able to maintain them in the roles doing content moderation, and to be able to, as you say, to support them, to make sure that there is the right support mechanisms on hand to ensure they don't get burned out or that they don't get traumatized.
Yeah, and towards the end of the interview, we actually kind of veered off on an offshoring direction as well. And I think that, that was because we were talking about where do we find all of this resource? And in the current kind of economic climate, where there's a hell of a lot of post-COVID uncertainty, it seems as if there's going to be a push towards offshoring. And Andrew was certainly talking a lot about South Africa and the kind of resource you can get down there. And I think that, that's backed up by some of your research, isn't it?
Yeah, South Africa definitely is playing into elements like content moderation. It's an offshore location and certainly brings that same level of value that most offshore locations do from a price standpoint. But where it brings, I think, the real value is in the ability to find people that have got those higher levels of education, the analytical skills, the problem solvers. This is not a location where you're talking about putting huge volumes of transactional work. This is where something like content moderation can shine. And to my mind, South Africa has got a huge amount of potential in terms of finding one of these frontline value add solutions that might take a little bit more of a process element, but certainly is going to be something that the buying community is going to be looking to the outsourcers to be able to provide.
All right, cool. Well, let's go straight to this conversation with Andrew Hall from Quantanite. Hi, Andrew. Great to get you on the podcast. Now, I know we're going to talk about a couple of different CX themes, but I wanted to focus initially just on content moderation because, this is an area that a lot of BPOs have moved into. And normally we think of it as just, controlling social media posts, taking down all of the, the offensive stuff that goes on YouTube and Facebook. But have we moved on? Is it more complex than that now?
Yes, I mean the proliferation of content now is absolutely huge, and it's way beyond just video content now. So you have voice content, you have written content as well, and across so many mediums. So we're seeing companies that we really wouldn't expect to ever need this kind of activity. Just coming to us, whether they're small or big. It's some of the big well-known online video companies are bound just to need continued growth and resource just to be able to cater for this. But more and more we're seeing, the written companies, the ones with advertisements and so forth now wanting to have this as a key part of what they do, and sensitivity around content, and certainly in some of the more litigious areas of the world, can become a really important area to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose you've got very specific laws in some countries, like Nazi propaganda in Germany. If someone starts posting that on Facebook, they can get into a lot of trouble.
Definitely. I mean, and it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because we talk about sort of sensitization and how well the advisors that are doing this actually know, and the AI tools for that matter, how well these tools actually know, and the people know the regions for which they're doing this moderation, and so. Pictures you'd think was relatively easy until you think about something like the Confederate flag on top of the Duke's car in the Dukes of Hazzard, and how offensive that can be in parts of America. Well, why would someone performing this kind of activity out of Bulgaria even know about the Confederate flag, or India, or anywhere? And so there is, and the same can be applied to written word, of course. Where the tolerance is much less in certain countries, but also the the type of offence that can be caused across different borders varies tremendously. So it does bring an interesting perspective on either training or localization of the activity that you do when you come to content moderation, and that is a key difference between some of this activity versus some of the other kind of more traditional outsourcing type activity.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because actually it was recently July the 4th, and I actually sent a WhatsApp to an American friend of mine saying I'm watching the Dukes of Hazzard for July 4th, and he didn't actually find it very funny at all. The General Lee car, it's definitely not amusing to a lot of Americans these days when you look back at American history, and yet this was primetime TV sort of 30 years ago or so.
Massively. I was talking to a friend of mine who was looking at doing some moderation in Nigeria a while ago, and Nigeria has got a very different viewpoint about content, and the people in Nigeria accept a much higher level of certain activities in their content than we would, for example, and Brazil would, for that matter, where you are, and so you have to decide very carefully how you deal with that, because you can't put a blanket level of control across everything. And certainly we're finding that in some of the accounts that we're working for, where we have to be very sensitive to the rules that are set out by the companies that we work for, as well as those local sensitivities.
And so how does AI help you filter out some of the worst stuff then? And is it like AI that the client applies and then they only kick out the worst stuff to be like manually checked, or is it like on the client side and on your side as well? It's sort of like a continuous sort of filter.
I think there's a desire from the outsourcers as ever to bring lots more to this than maybe most of the clients want. I would say 90% of the time the client is bringing their software in. And I think there's different levels of maturity around the software, both in terms of whether they're using it at all, but also in terms of the accuracy of it, whether it's hitting 80%, 90% of the content accurately, but there is sufficient volume of activity coming out. One of the well-known online, sort of short video companies, have got thousands of agents doing this now, and they have a very high level of success on AI. So, the demand is still equally as high, but once you want, even with AI. And so, yes, I think you're probably right in terms of, does it kick out some of the obvious content that shouldn't be there? Yes, it absolutely does. But it doesn't by any means leave it as zero. And so there's still an awful lot the advisors have to deal with.
I suppose for the live video platforms, the AI is all you've got, because we you can't have like agents reviewing stuff as it's being broadcast live.
It depends where you are. I remember the BBC always saying that they would leave a short period of time between what is actually truly live and what's live. They would allow assessment to take place very quickly to do that. So I think some will do that, but you're right. If you've got something like an Instagram live, for example, it really is live, and you have to take the content as it comes, but it's reviewed, and obviously people are taken down if they do bad things on there. So hopefully it won't happen again. But within I was doing some work with a dating company, professional work, of course, with a dating company last year. They had chat rooms where obviously things were going on live, and so the concept of moderators has been around for a long time, but I think it's becoming more important than ever now, given the nature of some of that content that's going on in those rooms.
Yeah, and that comes back to the first point as well, that this is actually a much bigger area than just social media now. If you're looking at dating platforms, they're introducing people, they've got chat forums, even retailers and e-commerce companies, they're reliant on reviews online, user-generated content. People are posting stuff about the products they've purchased, and of course you could have bad actors in there. So I guess this goes across many different industries, and it's not just like a short form video problem.
No, it's across everything. And the written word now is as core to this, if not more so, I think, coming in. The dating site is a really good example. We were doing some work where they were looking to launch kind of a chat rooms for women's issues. So things like abortion was one of those. And you imagine how sensitive that is. We've seen that in the US, and it's even trickling over here now in terms of conversations that are starting to have. And if you have a forum where, all views could come in, then it can become very offensive to a lot of people very quickly. So, I think companies equally as important as our ability to be able to look at the content and make judgments on that content is the company's ability to be able to change their rules and their processes to align with the times, because times change, right? And certain regions in the US now, I suspect the laws that they brought in could potentially outlaw certain conversations even happening, let alone the actual abortions happening. So it does become an incredibly sensitive topic that we have to deal with in many different facets.
Yeah, and it must be difficult to protect the people, like the agents who have to sort of work on filtering this content, because there's the obvious, the really nasty sort of visual content. But when you're talking about something like text abuse on abortion forums or something, some people have got to sit there all day monitoring and editing or banning people, but they've got to see everything. So how is it different from a regular kind of contact center job? How do you protect them, and what are the different kind of arrangements for these people?
I think it's very different. It's very different to start with, but I think if broadly across the contact center industry now, and because a lot of people that are coming into contact centers now to speak to people are a heightened sense of emotion a lot of the time. We are seeing a lot more aggression and a lot more anger and frustration coming to advisors, and I think this is part of the challenge around things like attrition and absence, mental well-being, and so forth. But when you apply that into this scenario, it becomes doubly worse, because these people are having to deal with really quite horrific content, and the whole thing around sensitization or desensitization is something we have to be very careful about. So it can do multiple things to these advisors. They can become desensitized to things that they just shouldn't be, or they can become mentally unwell as a result of things that they see constantly day in, day out. So there's a lot of work that goes in terms of well-being and people's general mental state within this environment. So often you'll find that providers will have wellness at the heart of everything, and a lot of the people that we work for will make an assessment of our wellness capability. So in Quantanite, we do external surveys of our team. We have mental wellness people come in and actually survey our team and try and get an understanding about where people are in terms of their mental well-being, who have been working on some of these campaigns, and we put action plans in place to kind of make sure that we're supporting those that need it. But equally, we're observing people through the day who are on certain types of campaigns where the content may be more aggressive than others, and we'll cycle people around different activities, based on their ability to do that, not just their physical ability to be able to do the job, but probably their mental well-ability, wellness as well, in terms of their appropriateness for doing some of that content. Attrition is actually pretty good in this environment, which suggests it's being done reasonably well. And you'll often find now a psychologist on site of these locations, and even people having a telephone number should they not want to go to the psychologist on site, because they might see it as a weakness if they go and see them, and they don't want to do that. So we'll give people telephone numbers that they can call for external counsel and so forth, and and we'll allow people freedom to be able to move between campaigns to protect their well-being.
Yeah, so if somebody says, look, this is getting too much, I want to work on something else, or I want to take a break, I guess that, in a normal BPO sales environment, that would be a problem if someone says, what, I don't really like this, I just want to go and do something else. But I guess when protecting well-being is kind of at the forefront, then I guess you need to support that.
I mean, if someone's just seen something terribly horrific, which hopefully wouldn't get through if the AI is doing its job, but if they have, it's you can imagine what's going on through their head, but maybe we can't imagine, because it can be horrible. I mean, I've had things slip through to my Facebook occasionally, or on my WhatsApp that I've looked at and wished I hadn't looked at. Imagine doing that day in, day out with this kind of content. It will get to you. So you have to be more lenient. You have to give people the time away from their desk. You have to over-index some of the operation to be able to cater for that as well. So I think these people aren't batteries. They're human beings, and the danger is we think of them as batteries, and that's the wrong thing to do.
And you said then just a minute ago that in the regular contact center environment, a lot more customers appear to be agitated and more angry than a couple of years ago. Do you think that that's partly the COVID effect, or is it that actually getting to the human agent is now happening after they've already tried something else, like they've talked to the chatbot or they've tried Google, so maybe they're on their third sort of level of support and they still haven't got an answer?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, look, I suspect if you and I were to talk about chatbots and virtual agents for a while, we'd probably find so many holes in them that, equally in terms of self-service, it's not the best. And you'll have a chat with someone online and get to the point of having that actioned, and they'll turn around and say, well, I'm not the person that can do it, I'll put you through to another team. So all this time, of course, people's frustration is building. But I think the main thing now is not being able to get hold of the person that just plain needs to do the thing. I mean, I've been sorting my pension out for I turned 55 recently, and I've been trying to sort my pensions out and get them into different pots and so forth. And there is one very well-known pension company that for 2 months now has not called me back, and I can't get through to them. I've spent probably 8-9 hours on the phone waiting, and so far they've sent me a check to apologize, which if they do every month, it's probably more interest than I'm going to get on the pension. But I literally am not getting any service from them, and I don't think they seem to care. Now, the reality is I seldom find an advisor who doesn't care. Most of them do care, but most of them are unable to help at that time. And so I think we are in a very strange place where, I don't think there are enough advisors on the phone. I don't think there is enough. I think that's it. I think we've just cut back. I was interested listening to the radio about the passport stuff, and the reality on passport is the government cut the number of seats sitting within the call center for people to be able to call into. They cut it right back because they didn't think it was necessary. Well, that's a huge part of what's going on. It's got nothing to do with people working from home at all. I don't believe that's ever going to be an issue, and home working's here to stay, and so be it. So no, I mean, that's my view. I think we've got poor service because we're not paying enough to people. They're happy to go to McDonald's, so we're not able to get the people. So attrition's driving a massive issue for us in the UK, which opens up opportunities for my business. And when people can't get the kind of service they want, they get frustrated and angry.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because I saw Phil First, the founder of HFS Research. Recently he wrote a blog saying, we've seen COVID. Everybody's business was up in the air over COVID. Now we're seeing this kind of economic downturn. We don't know how everybody's going to recover when it looks like there's a recession on the way in many major economies. So he's predicting that we're actually going to see a big growth in the use of offshoring. So, I mean, is that a trend that you guys also see? Because you've got a lot of resource over in Bangladesh. So I guess, if Phil's prediction is right, then you could be quite busy.
I think it's terrible to say, isn't it? But certain industries do very well out of crisis, and we saw our industry doing really well through COVID in terms of opportunities that came to it through resilience and so forth, and we all took advantage of that, and that was and thank God we could, because it really kept a number of companies going who couldn't get home and couldn't get their agents shifted on time. Now I think we're in a point where companies are looking at things like liquidity and their ability to pay their bills, and they're looking at attrition, where people are leaving their business, and mental well-being. There's a huge amount of absence within the UK now, and people coming in, being employed, do their training, and then never get on the floor. So companies and outsourcers alike that have UK on presence are really struggling to maintain the workforce. So where do you go? Well, you go to somewhere that's got the emotional EQ of the UK, which is South Africa or Jamaica, those kind of places, and you put work there. So we're seeing a massive growth in terms of CX front office type activity. Why wouldn't we? I think it's a challenge for some companies because they're having to rethink their policies around where work goes. That's quite an interesting one. I had a conversation with a PMI company the other day who said, our board aren't putting any work out offshore. We don't want to use offshore centres, but we will employ people from that country in our centres in the UK. Now, you could argue that the reason they're doing it is because they want to have UK employees, or you could argue that they probably want people with an English accent. It's probably the truth, but they're employing people from outside the UK in their centres. Well, it's the same accent we have in our South Africa centre. So there is no difference, and the EQ is as good in South Africa and better in many ways than the UK and the US. And in terms of Bangladesh, back office, moderation, data annotation, all these type of activities, it's just perfect. It's just perfect. And, we can get stuff there at a fraction of the cost, so we can release money back to companies that need to kind of manage their liquidity carefully. It's a win-win for everyone.
Okay. And so then apart from offshoring, if we're looking at post-COVID recovery of BPO, what are the clients talking to you about at the moment then, if we're just sort of looking to the year ahead?
I think what I've just said is driving a lot of the activity right now, to be honest, Mark. What we're seeing is people being forced to do certain things that maybe they didn't originally want to see. We work a lot in the those companies in Series C, Series D type funding, so they're really on that ascent to kind of that unicorn status, and we see those companies kind of breaking through to a point where, if they don't have a company like us supporting them, they never came into this because they were customer experience experts. They came in because they were disruptors, and and their business has grown to the point where their customers now want to speak to them, and we have to put something in place. So I think we're starting to see companies come with a greater interest in terms of what technology we can provide. Can we provide soup to nuts of everything that they'd need, but also and support that growth as they scale, to manage costs effectively as they grow. And clearly having the centres that we've got, and gives us that great opportunity to do that. But we're also seeing those larger companies that need to scale down operations, who have got high costs, who need to do that kind of more shift left to self-serve type thing, coming on board now and starting to talk to us, and trying to understand how we can help them to scale down their operation by moving more capabilities upstream into that self-service environment. So it's a really exciting time, and there's lots of things going on, and it's the right time to be in this space. It really is.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week. All right, Andrew. And the dog just jumped in just at the end there as well.
Absolutely.